So we've looked at the learning theory of attachment, which is the first theory of attachment, and the second theory is Bowlby's theory of attachment. Now remember, Bowlby is named on the spec twice. This is his first theory that you need to know, and then he's got another theory about deprivation. So if it asks about Bowlby's theory of attachment, it's this evolutionary theory that we need to refer to. So it's Bowlby's attachment theory, it's Bowlby's evolutionary theory. So this is based on how babies look, really. Now, if you look at the babies, if you look at the pictures here, if you notice, they all tend to have big eyes, they tend to have kind of a small chin, a high forehead. They look quite cute. Human babies, kind of baby animals, they look quite cute. And Bowlby's idea is that this is an adaptive response, is that infants have features which are referred to as social releases, which we'll come to later on, that make them seem appealing to other people. So that helps them form an attachment. So babies are designed to look cute. It's called a social releaser, and it's to encourage an attachment with a caregiver. So we've looked at the learning theories. So the idea with learning theories is infants learn attachments because of food, so through conditioning. So you learn an attachment. It's a behaviorist theory. The evolutionary theory suggests that attachments are innate, so they're inbuilt. We have this tendency both in infants and caregivers to want to form an attachment. So it's like biologically inbuilt, it's biologically deterministic that we will form attachments. It's innate, it's something that's built into us. Now, this comes from the idea that it's useful to form an attachment. It's adaptive. It helps the survival of a species, and it works from the idea that babies need help to survive. So it's adaptive for them to form an attachment with a caregiver. So adaptive, that's the key term, and we're going to come back to that in a second. So that's Bowlby there. So his idea was that we have this tendency to form an attachment. It's adaptive. It makes it more likely that we survive. He agreed with Lorenz in that there's an idea of a critical period. So there is an important time in which an infant needs to develop an attachment. And this is his evolutionary theory. Now, how to remember it? It's the acronym Ask Me. So as it says at the bottom, it's ASCMI. But if you remember as Ask Me, that's the acronym you need to remember. There's 5 steps of Bowlby's evolutionary theory. If we go through them one by one. So the first one is the fact that attachments are adaptive. So that's your A. So they give us an advantage. They make us more likely to survive because a caregiver will look after an infant. They're more likely to survive. So attachments are adaptive. That's the A. That's the first thing. They're adaptive. They're beneficial for our survival. The second thing is S, it's social releases. So babies have these social releases, these cues, these features of themselves, which unlock the tendency of adults to look after them. So they can be physical and they can be behavioral. So babies look cute, they make us want to look after them. Babies act in a way that's cute. So those are social releases. So that's the S, adaptive social releases. Third aspect of the theory is a critical period. So babies have to form an attachment with a caregiver within a critical period. Bowlby suggested this was in the first 2.5 years of a baby's life. And Bowlby said if this didn't happen, the child would be damaged socially, emotionally, intellectually, and physically. And we come back to this later on in his theory of deprivation. But it's the idea that babies need to form an attachment in the first 2.5 years. So there's a critical period. So attachments are adaptive. They're formed due to social releases. They occur within a critical period. These attachments tend to be formed with one special person. This is the idea of monotropy. If you remember, Bowlby suggested it was the mother that you form an attachment with. This is an example of alpha bias. the baby could bond with a mother substitute, but it's one special attachment. So monotropy, one attachment, one special attachment. So it's adaptive, you've got social releases, there's a critical period, you've got monotropy, and then the last aspect of the theory is this thing called an internal working model. Bowlby argues that when we form this monotropic special attachment with one person, it creates an internal working model. This is a cognitive model. This is a type of a schema for relationships that we have with other people. So it's a series of connections in our brain where we learn what an attachment is and we learn what a relationship is. And Bowlby suggested that with this internal working model, it then guides us later on in life when we form friendships and when we have relationships. They're all based on this internal working model, this experience that we have had of an attachment, of a relationship when we were younger. So Bowlby suggests that all of our future relationships are based on our internal working model, which is formed through our attachment with our monotropic caregiver in the first 2.5 years of our life. So that's your AO1, this adaptive, social releases, critical period, monotropy, and internal working model. There is also another key term to add to there, which is something called the continuity hypothesis. Now, this goes alongside the internal working model, and it's the idea that good attachment in childhood means we will have good attachments in adulthood. If we don't form a good attachment in childhood, it suggests that we cannot form a good attachment in adulthood. So that's the continuity hypothesis. In terms of some evaluation, there's some in your booklet and there's some in the textbook, but it's worth noting that Bowlby's theory is biologically deterministic. It's saying that this will happen, it's innate. It explains why attachment is adaptive. It explains why it helps us because it forms in this critical period when babies are pretty much useless. There is a counter argument that instead of a critical period, it should be referred to as a sensitive period. So there's not a fixed cutoff point, but there's a time where it's easier to form attachments. The idea of a sensitive period said that attachments can be formed outside this initial window. It's just it might be more difficult. There's research to support Bowlby's idea of monotropy, this idea that we form a special attachment with one person, and there's also support for the continuity hypothesis. A good example of research is something called the love quiz, which we'll look at later on.